Hi, and welcome
Bringing
to
dogs and
Field
cats
Guide.
together
Today,
isn't
I'm
necessarily
walking you
about
through how I
friendship.
start
It's about
introducing the crate,
neutrality first.
not as a confinement
When we
tool,
think
but
about
as a comfort
neutrality,
space.
especially in
This
terms
is the
of two
very
different
first layer of a
species,
larger
what
process, and while
I
we won't cover
ideally want
duration or
is
being
a
left alone
dog
just
or
yet,
whatever the bigger
this
animal
is where
is
the real
to
confidence
essentially
begins.
be able to conduct their regular business
Hi, and welcome
without
to Field Guide. Today,
any
I'm walking you
overfixation,
through how
any
I start introducing
intimidation
the crate,
of the
not as
smaller
a
animal.
confinement tool,
And
but
what I
as
want
a
from the
comfort
smaller
space.
animal is that they are
This is
not
the very first layer of a larger process,
either
and while we
through
won't cover
flight or
duration
fight,
or being left alone
attracting
just
the
yet,
attention of
this
the
is
larger
where the
animal.
real confidence
So I don't
begins.
want to see reactivity.
Hi,
I
and
don't want
welcome
to
to
see,
Field Guide.
really,
Today, I'm
I
walking
don't
you through
particularly
how I
want to see
start introducing
friendliness.
the
I
crate,
just want to
not as a
see
confinement tool,
calm.
but as a comfort space.
I am back again with Astro in a field note session where I have a full episode of an uncut training session. If there are cuts, I will always make sure to point them out. There is one in this session where today we are working on cat and dog neutrality. Now, a few things that I want to emphasize as we dive into this. Keep in mind that in any field note session, you're not necessarily seeing the very beginning of the behavior unless that's specifically stated, and you're not likely seeing the very end result of the behavior and how we want it to look in its final form. This is just a stage of the process along the way that you can use and adapt at home, or you can fold into an existing training plan. Now, when we're working on cat and dog relationships, there's a couple of prerequisite behaviors that are helpful to have before you start in on this. And then there's a few things that you want to keep in mind as you're working through this. The first is the temperament of the dog. This is a good fit for dogs who are struggling with adjusting to cats in the house, but not due to serious predatory behavior. If you are seeing predatory intent towards your cats, you need to seek out a professional and work with them very, very closely, first on management to keep your animals safe, and then on whatever the next steps might be in moving through that. This is not for that. This is more for the dog who is excited because the cat moves around, maybe moves quickly, is a little worried about the cat, or just is overly interested with them. The other thing to keep in mind is that practicing these behaviors outside of the more difficult situation with the cat there is essential to success. So behaviors that you might want your dog to have already is a good association with a snuffle mat or another object that you can give them a little bit of a reprieve or a break in movement with. Ideally, they have a place behavior. Ideally, they have a look at that behavior. Some behaviors it can be helpful for the cats to have. It can be helpful if they have a strong, good association with the room or the space that you're working in. It is ideal if they have some sort of stationing behavior. So normally I would recommend that a cat be up high, but my cats all really, really like the station boards and the platform boards because we do training with them. So we have the platform board for the cat to station on when she comes in. The other absolutely vital thing in this practice is that the cat is entirely able to choose when they enter the training session, when they leave the training session, and where they are during the training session. I'm going to treat the cat for staying on the station. I'm going to prevent the cat from getting too close to Astro for his sake, but the cat has freedom of movement throughout this. They are a voluntary participant in total, which is why we have this long period of time before the session really gets started to warm Astro up, to have him practice some stillness on the mat while we wait for Karma to decide if she wants to come in the room. Once she's there, you'll notice that I have Astro moved over to his snuffle mat so he can focus on that while the cat is actively moving. And I have a handful of treats on his mat so he can't leave the snuffle mat and just immediately charge the cat. Here's where I'm getting kind of a concept of where he is in his excitement. Now, Astro is not actively working on cat-dog neutrality for his home, but I've noticed that he is very excited about the cats when he boards here, so he was the perfect candidate to do some work on introducing this. So some of the things you might notice is the cat is getting regular treats for hanging out on the station. That's both to reinforce her own stationing behavior and also to keep her relatively still. One of the things that I don't want, while the cat is free to move where she wants, one of the things I don't want is the cat to suddenly bolt or run in a way that's going to be especially exciting and difficult to handle for the dog. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm positioned in between these two stations. So Astro can see Karma on a diagonal, but he would basically have to kind of go through me in order to access her or access the station, at which point she would have already left. It is so, so important, in the same vein of it being the cat's choice. It is so, so important that the cat is confident and comfortable in this situation. One, that's going to make them behave less like an exciting prey to chase, but also for their own stressors. Cats have a unique position of being both a predator animal and a prey animal, and their behavior shows that. So we want to make special accommodations that we may kind of push boundaries of if we're working on neutrality around other dogs with a generally friendly but overexcitable dog. With cats, we just want to proceed extra slowly with extra deference to their particular needs and their particular fears. So Karma, fortunately, is old hat at this. So she's really just going to hang out on the station. She doesn't even like to leave the station when we're doing our own training sessions. So you'll see a couple times I try to get her to move, and she doesn't want to because her station is where she goes when she's in this room. So right now, all we're doing is alternating feeding the dog and the cat, and I'm rewarding Astro for any offered look at that to the cat. If he gets too sticky, then I'm going to toss a handful of treats over to the snuffle mat before guiding him back to the mat. The other thing that I'm using the snuffle mat for is as Astro acclimates and seems to relax on the mat watching the cat, is then I can introduce a little bit of movement. Now, just like working with reactive dogs, I'm not going to have everybody start moving at the same time. But what I am going to have is Astro being able to have freedom of movement and then seeing if he can come back and settle back on the mat, mostly voluntarily, just like he did there. I'm going to do that a couple times. And I might also intersperse some interacting with the cat. So not necessarily prompting the cat to move, but petting her, talking to her, interacting with her more and more in ways that'll result in her interacting with me more and more, which is also an object of interest. Now, around this time, something else that you should be aware of is just out of sight, just out of the training room, our other cat, Soot Sprite, has shown up outside the door. He did not decide he wanted to come in during the session, but we are going to use him behind a baby gate. So this is the other piece that you want to consider is what levels of separation, what levels of protection do you have in place should the dog decide to chase the cat, pounce at the cat, bark at the cat? What are the options for control? So one of the options you'll notice is that Astro is dragging a leash. In some cases, especially when he's still on the mat and he's very, very close to the cat, I'm holding on to it. At other points, especially as he's getting more relaxed, you can see I'm moving Karma around to each side of the station because I know she won't go off. There are moments that I'll let him drag the leash, but it is there to be grabbed. Ideally, again, my cats have a deep, deep appreciation for their platforms. But ideally, I might do this with a more typical cat. I might do this sitting on a chair. So Astra's on the floor and the cat is perched on the top of the chair. And there is a difference in height as well as me being between them. And when I start letting Astro move towards where Soot Sprite is, at that point, I know that there is a baby gate that is between Astro and Soot Sprite. There's also a little bit of protection in the freedom of movement the cat has. They can immediately have access to several heightened areas of this room where they can get out of Astro's reach quickly. And that's also very important. Always, always, always have space where your cats can leave but remain in the room, but be somewhere where the dog can't access them. So somewhere that they can jump up to, that's easy for them to access, that they can keep separate from the dog's areas. So we've got some just practicing being able to look at each other, being able to relax. I'm chatting with him. I'm talking to Karma. I'm making a point of being a little more animated in my interactions with both animals, because that brings a little bit of arousal up. That brings a little bit of excitement. And then we're going to start practicing some more complex movements. So not only the snuffle mat, but can Astro chase a treat and then come back? And essentially what I want to see is that he ignores the cat. I want him to head back. He headed back to a snuffle mat. That's fine. I want him to head back to the mat to lay down. That's fine. What I don't want is him rushing, or just out of curiosity and sniffing, approaching the cat. And that is primarily because I don't even want that nice calm approach, because depending on the cat's reaction, if the cat gets spooked and runs away, that can still trigger a super high energy, super highly arousing response that ends the session in a way that I don't want it to. So I want these to be entirely about ignoring that the cat is even there after a certain point. So this is also where I start tossing treats over towards the entrance to the room. There's a little tiny hallway that way, but he's probably 2 feet away from the cat at this point. And what I love is that, yes, the treat went underneath the washing machine, and that made things a little harder for him. But he goes over there, he searches for the treat, he realizes he's not getting the treat, and then he just wanders his way back over here. He doesn't think about stopping by Karma. He doesn't think about sniffing at Soots between the bars. He is just focused on returning over here and able to focus on simple behaviors in the presence of these cats. So this is a great first step and beginning spot to getting him used to the cats in the area. I might proceed from this by changing where I'm having this set up. I might change how many behaviors I'm asking of him. I might do some actual manners training or obedience training pointedly while the cat's in the room. But essentially what I want is for this dog to get used to just living life with the cat nearby. I'd also want to see more movement from the cats. I kind of drew this out a little bit longer than I probably should have, because I was hoping that Soot Sprite would decide to walk into the room. But essentially, you want to keep these sessions fairly short. What I set for myself is I get out the cat treats. When the cat treats I got out are done, the session is done, and we're going to clean up. I want to really emphasize that, because even if your dog is working really well, even if they're calm, we are asking the cats to put themselves in a position that they may be unsure of. And again, as prey animals, they aren't necessarily going to show that discomfort and that displeasure as easily as we can read our dogs. So I want to keep the session short, not just for the dog's benefit and for their training, but also for the cat's stress levels and comfort. And you'll see that it was affecting them. Karma pretty much stays on the platform because that's where she wants to be. But very shortly after I put Astro up is when Soot Sprite decides to come into the room. And it really is very clear that he was staying out of the room because he didn't want to do a dog-cat session. And that's totally fine. So making sure that we are honoring all the animals in the process and keeping an eye on what their stress levels might look like and how we can best support all of them is absolutely vital to building better cat-dog relationships in your home.
If you want to learn
When your
how
dog
to
sees the
expand this
crate as
process
part of
into
their
longer
environment
durations
rather
or more
than a
complex
place that
routines,
they go or that they
reach
are
out to me
forced
through my
into,
social media.
that's when you're
subscribe
truly
here,
building comfort.
and
If
maybe
you
we
want to
can
learn
work
how to
together
expand
to
this
take these
process
first
into
steps
longer
and turn them
durations
into
or more
real world
complex
confidence.
routines, check out my webpage
If you want to
at
learn how to expand this process into longer durations or
www.likemagicdogtraining.com,
more complex
or
routines,
visit me on
reach out to me
YouTube
through my
or
social
on
media,
any
subscribe
of
here,
the other
and
social
maybe
media
we can work
platforms
together to take these
as
first
Like
steps
Magic
and
Dog
turn them
Training.
into real
I'd
world
love to help.
confidence.